Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Ruggiano, and in 1988, I was struggling with addiction, and I went into a treatment center. I set up a helpline number, which is 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. That number, phones will be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you're struggling with addiction, or you know someone that is struggling with addiction, please call that number and let me help. I will be hands-on. I will be personally involved in the person's recovery. They will meet me. They will spend time with me, and I will help them live a life beyond their wildest dreams. Just want to let everybody know the shirts are in, Reformed Gangsters. If you want to purchase one, please go to my website, anthonyruggiano.com, and order your shirt. Come get them. They're hot. The second time I met Paul Castellano was at my wedding, which was a festive story. You know, that was also in 1977 in the Lamia in October of 77. He came to my wedding and, you know, he sat down at a table with all the captains. My father had a special table for them. And my father brought me over to the table. And of course, I knew him from the sit down over my brother's friend Tommy. And you know, he kissed me hello and he gave me an envelope and he gave me $500. Back in 1977, that was a lot of money, and it was signed Paul Castellano, and my father ripped up the card and threw it out. If I would have had that card now, it probably would be worth money because he like signed his name, Love Paul Castellano. He didn't even put like Love Paul. He signed it, Love Paul Castellano, you know, and there was five $100 bills in it. And that was the second time I met him in 1977. I didn't have any more meetings with him after that. My father did, of course. My father met him on many occasions. My father used to go, they used to meet once a week in this restaurant on 49th Street, right around the corner from the UN, right around the corner from the UN, an Italian restaurant on 49th Street, and which had like a back room. When you walked in, it was the restaurant, and then there was like a couple of steps that went up into the back room, and they would meet up there. Joe Gallo, the consigliere, and Neil and Paul would meet up there every week, and my father would go there because my father was running the Tapers Union for them, so he would go there to discuss the union, and he was trying to get into this club. They had a club which Sammy the Bull knows a lot about. They had a construction club. They were bid rigging and all that. And my father was trying to get his drywall business into the club. He never did, but he was attempting to try to get a membership into what they called the club. So he always had dealings with Paul Castellano. So moving forward, also at this time in the early 80s, I'm in Florida, and I have a beef with this kid in this bar called Happy's Bar on the 79th Street Causeway. It was this famous bar down in Miami that was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this guy in there tried to shake me down. And I heard through the grapevine, his father was Peanuts, who was the underboss of Cleveland, of the Cleveland mob, which was, he was in that movie, They Kill Irishmen, or The Irishman, something about the Irish guy that was blowing everybody up and everything. And then they blew him up in Cleveland. He was at war with the Mafia. So I had a beef with him, and I busted him up in this bar, Happy's. I had a fist, I broke him, I dropped him, I knocked him out. He broke, you know, like I banged him up, I messed him up bad. Tony Lee had to fly down because my father was incarcerated. So Tony Lee had to fly down to Miami, and we had to sit down in McDonald's with Peanuts, the underboss of Cleveland. and me and Tony Lee in McDonald's having breakfast with the underboss of Cleveland in this McDonald's in Miami, and he knew his son was a F up. He knew his son was a swindler, and his son tried to shake me down for $500. I was doing something, making money with some people, and he tried to tell me they were with him, and I made $500 with them, and I had to give him the $500. And I looked at him and I go, so in other words, you want to rob the robber? I told him that's what you want to do. You want to rob the robber, and I hit him and I dropped him, and and then so we had to sit down, and he wasn't mad peanuts. He was usually, that could have been a sticky situation. He was the underboss of the family of Cleveland, and he gave Tony Lee permission to sit down with him, even though Tony was just a soldier. We didn't need a captain with us or anybody, and he knew my father. He knew my father was incarcerated, and anyway, we straightened it out. I saw his son after that. We shook hands, and he told me, I know my son, he gets drunk, he gets stupid, and that was it. So that was a thing I had with him, with the underboss of Cleveland. And right before that, before my father got incarcerated, not to be jumping all over the place, but my father had an Italian restaurant on the 79th Street Causeway also called Dano's. And in that restaurant, I met Joe Tadera. He was the boss of Buffalo, and his son, Joe Tadera Jr., who was a captain in that family. They allegedly say they invented the buffalo wing because they had a famous restaurant in Buffalo that's allegedly sold the best buffalo wings around, and they were very wealthy. My father said they had millions of dollars because they had no competition in Buffalo, and they were the only ones up there, so they had it all up there. They had everything up there, that everything belonged to them. They had a contract with Castro Convertible. They made the mattresses. They had a mattress factory that they had an exclusive. Back then, Castro Convertibles were very, very big with the beds, and they made the mattresses. He was a jolly guy, always had a cigar in his mouth, always with his girlfriend. He was a snowbird. He came down to Florida in the winter, stood in Buffalo in the summer, always laughing, always chewing on a cigar. Nicest guy in the world. The boss of Buffalo, jolly guy. Loved my father. I even ran into him once after that, after my father got incarcerated, and I met him in a restaurant by Gulfstream Racetrack, and he was in the back with a bunch of guys, and he saw me walk in. He called me over, hugging me, kissing me. He paid my check. He picked up my tab, asking me how my father was, if there's anything he could do for him. Now his son today, from what I understand, from what I read in the newspapers and what I hear about the mob, his son now is the boss. He passed away. Now his son, Joe Jr., is the boss of Buffalo. I met him. Also, I met, someone asked me the other day about the DeCavalcanti family. Sam DePlummer was the boss of the DeCavalcanti family, and he had a condo right across the street from my father's restaurant. And on any given night, you would walk in and he'd be sitting there, sometimes by himself, having dinner. He had a mustache. I remember he had a bad stomach. I think he might have even died of stomach cancer, but I know he had intestinal problems because he used to talk to my father about it. And sometimes he didn't look good. He looked sickly because he had some stomach issues. So, so now here I am, I'm in my 20s. I'm walking in my father's restaurant, and Joe Tadera is there, the boss of Buffalo. Sam DePlummer is there, the boss of Jersey. Peanuts is there, the underboss of Cleveland. I mean, and this is all happening, and in my life, and I'm having interactions with these powerful mob guys, the next guy, of course, is John Gotti. I mean, we all know my relationship with him. He became the boss of the Gambino family. That's 10 different shows altogether. We all know what he did for me in my relationship with him, which we'll talk about at later dates. Also, Vic Amuso, the boss of the Lucchese family. I knew him when he first got straightened out. I knew him when he was a captain, and I knew him when he became the boss. I never did business with him, but I interacted with him on many times. I saw him many times on Howard Beach. We had drinks together. He offered, my father had some legal matter going, which I spoke about at another time. My father had some legal issues going to try to get some time cut off his sentence. And I saw him on Crosby Boulevard, and he had heard about it, and he took me over to the side. Now, here's the boss of the Lucchese family, a powerful guy that's beefing with the Gambinos, beefing with John Gotti, who was the boss. But yet my father, who Vic Amuso really liked, because my father had a good relationship with Chrissy Ticker, who straightened Vic Amuso out, and who put Vic Amuso in that spot to become the boss. Chrissy Ticker was the underboss, who also I had a relationship with, and I knew, from the 19th hole, and who was in prison with my father, and how I had sit-downs with Tony Lee, Chrissy Ticker over things. So that's another person I knew, another underboss I knew. And Vic Amuso took me over to the side. And he told me, listen, if your father needs any money, don't ask anybody, just come ring my bell. He lived in Howell Beach. He had a big house in Howell Beach. He says, you just come ring my bell, and whatever your father needs, you got, and he always gave me money for my father's commissary, so that's another boss I interacted with. Of course, Joe Messina. I knew Joe Messina from before he got straightened out. I knew Joe Messina before he got straightened out. I knew Joe Messina when he was a soldier in the Banana family. I knew Joe Messina when he became a captain in the Banana family, and then I knew Joe Messina when he became the boss of the Banana family. Another guy I worked with, when he was a captain, he owned they had a crap game together. John Gotti, us, Joe Messina, they had a crap game, and I worked in the crap game. My father had points in the crap game. Joe Messina had points in the crap game. He was there every day. I always interacted with him. He always treated me well. Joe Messina, always. If I walked in a restaurant in the neighborhood, out to Donna's or a diner or anywhere, or Russo's on Lefferts Boulevard, where anytime I walked into a restaurant and he was there, he picked up my check. Always treating me well. I even went to him for a favor. I had a beef for a guy around, this guy, Big Louie, the Louie Metropolitan, who was a captain in the Banana family when Joe Messina was the boss. A guy around him owed me $15,000 for sports. He was betting with us, and he lost $15,000. And he gave Mikey Gal, who wasn't a captain, he gave us permission to go see this Louis Metropolitan, who was a captain in the Banana family, because when a soldier has to sit down with a captain, he needs to go with his captain unless he gets permission. A soldier can't just sit down with a captain. It's protocol, it's a chain of command. You got to go with your captain to sit down with a captain unless you get permission. So, this Louis Metropolitan, we got permission. We went to his club on Metropolitan Avenue, which, that's his name, Louis Metropolitan. He hung out on Metropolitan Avenue, right? We go there, and, through Joe Messina, through, my relationship with Joe Messina, Louis knew that I had a relationship with Joe Messina. Joe Messina already sent word to him that we were coming there, that it was okay for us to go there. And we sat down, and I sat down with the guy's father. The guy owed us $15,000, but the father sat down. The father was with Louis Metropolitan, not the kid that owes the money. The kid's father was with Louis Metropolitan, and we sat down with Louis Metropolitan and the kid's father, and he was upset, the father, his son put him in a predicament. And, bookmaking's on paper. People, you hear stories, they're going to break your nose, they're going to break your head, they're going to, when people owed us money for sports, I always made deals because it was always on paper. It wasn't like Shylock and you weren't giving them cash. Or, it wasn't like a loan. It was all on paper. They called in a bet, you wrote it down, you put the slip in, unless they beat you for a lot of money, and you paid them a lot of money, and then when it was their turn to pay you, they stiffed you, then it's more than paper. But this guy had just started betting with us, and it wasn't really, he wasn't into us for any kind of money, any kind of substantial money. So, I made a deal with the father for $7,500. I took, half in cash, and I squashed the other half, and we shut the kid out. You know what I mean? And I did that out of respect for Joe Messina and this Louis Metropolitan. So we took $7,500 and we called it even. And the kid was shut out. The kid couldn't bet with us no more. So that was my thing with Joe Messina, my thing with Vic Amuso. I met the boss of Philadelphia, Joey Molina. I had dealings with him. He became very good friends with my father in prison. He became really good friends with my father in Allenwood. They were together. My father took a real liking to him. He was a tough kid, a good kid, loved sports, big gambler. My father really took a liking to him. My father knew Nicky Scaffa, who was the boss before Joey of Philadelphia. My father knew Nicky Scaffa from the 60s, from Atlantic City. We used to go there every summer on vacation, and my father would hang out with Nicky in the 500 Club. My father knew Nicky well. You know, my father always liked Nicky Scaffa, who was another psychopathic murderer. And you know, Joey Molina, when he got out of prison, you know, I was bringing messages back and forth from New York to him, and he was calling my house regularly. Matter of fact, when my phone was bugged, they had Joey Molina on a ton of tapes. So, you know, he was the boss of Philadelphia. The last message I brought him was the guy, he was straightening out guys that were from South Jersey, New Jersey, not from Philadelphia, because for some reason, South Jersey thinks they're from Philadelphia. If you ever meet guys from South Jersey, they say they're from Philly. I don't know why, but that's what they do. And I guess the commission, because Nicky Carrazza told me to go to Philadelphia and tell Joey that for them that they have to stop straightening out guys from South Jersey. They could only straighten out guys from Philadelphia, that they weren't going to recognize anybody that was straightened out by them from South Jersey. So I brought that message to them. And that was part of my indictment too, that I was bringing messages back and forth, like unindicted co-conspiracies. I was bringing messages back and forth from Philly, from New York to Philly, only because I, you know, had a good relationship with Joey Molina, and because my father had a good relationship with him. And then he started doing business with the Gambino family through his relationship with my father. So that was another boss I met. And of course, last but not least was, you know, Buffalino from, you know, Pittston, from Pennsylvania, who was a main character in The Irishman, who, you know, Joe Pesci played. He was the boss of Pittston, you know, from Pennsylvania. Very powerful mob guy. And his underboss, Billy, who we knew good. I remember he was a stocky guy, Billy, always with him. We would go there for Christmas. He had a big Christmas party every year, and we would go there, you know, when I started, you know, when I was 18, 19, 20, all in the early 70s. I didn't really see him much after that. Or always in the early 70s, we would always go there. About 2 weeks before Christmas, we would drive there. My father, me, his whole crew, my father's whole crew, we would all go up there, and he had a big Christmas party. Matter of fact, the last Christmas party I went to up there was in this beautiful place, and Tony Bennett put on a show there. Like Tony Bennett sang, like he was there. That's the first, you know, I saw Tony Bennett sing at this Christmas party that Buffalino, you know, put on. You know, he sang to the mob, Tony Bennett, you know, and of course, you know, they were all mobbed up, I guess, right? Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. And so that, you know, and he was also the first person to arrive at my wedding in 1977. Him and his whole crew, they came in limos, and they pulled up at my wedding like 2 hours before my wedding started. So, you know, so throughout all these years, I ran, you know, the chin. I never met him, but I saw him. He waved to my father with his bathrobe on. You know, I met his brother. I had to sit down with his brother, who was a captain. You know, and, you know, I was in the street for so many years. You know, I was in the streets from when I was 15, you know, 14, 15, 16, till, you know, my 50s. And, you know, I met everybody at some point or the other, you know. But, you know, those are, you know, not too many people. I don't think there's too many people, even on this genre, that could say they had personally met or interacted with the bosses I have. Not that it makes me better than them. Maybe I was just around longer than them, or maybe I was just out there more than them. Because a lot of people, you know, I was a guy that always went out. I wasn't a guy to sit in the club and play cards. You know, I was out. I was in clubs. I was in bars. I was in the racetrack. I was in the crap games. You know, I was in the street. I was running around in the street. So, you know, a lot of things were going on. I was always into something. I was always into action. You know, I never had enough. Maybe that's my personality. That's why I got jammed up with drugs, because, you know, it was never enough. I always wanted more, the next one, the next one, the next one. So maybe that's how I interacted with all these bosses and had all these little sit downs with them throughout the years. But, you know, most of them treated me well. Of course, I was Fat Andy's son. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't all to do with me. You know, I'm a nobody. You know, it was definitely the beginning was I was Andy's son, Fat Andy's son, and that opened up the door for me, and that made them respect me because they respected my father, you know, and they all helped me. They all looked out for me, even when I was strung out. You know, nobody ever chased me or, you know, didn't want to help me when I went to them. So, you know, I had a good relationship with everybody. Let me think, is there anybody else I could talk about? Of course, we all know Sammy the Bull was the underboss, and I had a relationship with Sammy, you know, and I'll get into that in the future with Sammy. You know, Sammy always treated me well, always. I had a lot, you know, a lot of respect for Sammy. You know, he was a tough guy. He was a killer. You know, he always treated me well. You know, whenever I interacted with him, you know, he was a gentleman to me, made me laugh, you know, and I'll get into that relationship at a later date. Thanks for tuning in to Reform Gangsters. And don't forget, please, if you haven't, hit the subscribe button. I'd like to get my subscribers up, my views up, you know, become a Patreon member. It's only $5 a month. Get early access, ask me questions. There's going to be a lot of good content coming out in the future. You know, I got a lot of things on the fire. My Netflix show should be coming out soon. I don't have a date yet or a month, but I know it's pretty soon. And I also have some other surprises coming up this month that should be coming out probably, I would say, sometime in August and September. So, you know, we have a lot of exciting things happening, and stay tuned.